What's going on, Warriors? It's Coach Jay. Today we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about dieting and blood sugar levels. If it's the first time on the channel, guys, I help diabetics to build muscle, burn body fat, control their blood sugars overall. But hey, if you're not a diabetic and you like things like supplement reviews or vlog style videos, I also do a lot of those as well. I'm a type 1 diabetic myself for over 26 years. So just imparting some knowledge after doing things like bodybuilding, playing high level sports. So we're just going to dive into this today, guys, and just break this down some more for y'all. I'll see you guys on the other side. When you're on a diet, you're likely taking in lower calories. Calories are just the energy budget that your body needs to take in from the foods that you eat in order to maintain your weight. Now, there's obviously other factors that are important, but just to keep it general, calories are essentially what helps you to maintain weight or what lead to you gaining the weight or losing weight. And so if you are eating at a caloric maintenance, that means your body is just taking in what your body needs to function and maintain weight. If your body is in a caloric surplus, you're eating more calories than you need, then you tend to gain weight. If your body is eating in what's called a calorie deficit, then you tend to lose weight. And I say tend to because there's other factors that are important as to whether or not somebody holds on to stubborn body fat or weight outside of just looking at a calorie deficit. So if you're on a diet, you're likely in a calorie deficit. You're taking in less calories than your body needs. And calories can be broken down into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So typically the body will go through this process of burning fat and burning glucose for energy. And when you're in a deficit, your body can tend to burn a little bit more body fat. In order to understand why it's important for us to burn more body fat, it's important for us to understand how fat impacts our blood sugar levels as type 1 diabetics. In type 1 diabetics, our bodies can release more fat, more free fatty acids. In type 1 diabetics, you're gonna see more of what's called lipolysis. Lipolysis is the breakdown of stored fat, free fatty acids that then get released into the bloodstream. Now, because type 1 diabetics have more insulin resistance than non-diabetics, what ends up happening is sometimes you see more of these free fatty acids flowing in the blood. As a result, the body sometimes tends to need more insulin to then bypass these fats, which can interfere with what's called insulin signaling. And if these fats interfere with insulin signaling, the body will just need more insulin to be able to shuttle the glucose to the cells. Insulin's job not only just shuttle glucose into the body's cells, but it can also suppress the breakdown of these fats from inside fat cells. And so if the body's not responding as well to insulin in type 1, since we don't respond as well to insulin as non-diabetics, now what happens is the breakdown of fat just keeps happening. If the breakdown of fat keeps happening in the cells, gets released into the blood, now again, you've got higher levels of fat in the blood, which makes it harder for insulin to do its job in shuttling glucose to the cells, so you need more insulin. It's kind of a contradiction because the body will then try to store more from the excess insulin you have. You're sending signals that say, store this fat, don't burn it. So you've got like these systems that are going up and going down and all around, and everything is just out of whack. So it just keeps circulating and becomes an issue. And so when you're on a diet, this helps your body to burn more body fat, to use this more. Now, fat also releases inflammatory molecules called cytokines. And so your fat cells release these cytokines called adipokines. And these adipokines are going to get released into your body, and some of them are pro-inflammatory. So they lead to more inflammation in the body. Now, releasing these adipokines help your body with things like communication and managing the healing process in your body as well. But the issue is when you have higher levels of fat, these inflammatory molecules like IL-6, which gets released from fat, and you got things like TNF, tumor necrosis factor. These are all inflammatory responses that get released from your fat cells. And the more inflammation you have in your body, that also can interfere with insulin signaling and insulin resistance. So we see now that we have these higher levels of free fatty acids. We have issues with fat storage as well. We tend to store more body fat as type 1 diabetics over time just because of the insulin that we're taking in, which is different than the insulin that's coming from your pancreas in terms of its direction. And so as a result of all of this, then your body then now starts to release a little bit more inflammation. So you have this chronic low-grade inflammation that happens, which also interferes with insulin resistance. What's important to understand is how fat can interfere with insulin signaling in a type 1 diabetic. This way we can understand why it is that when you are in a deficit and you're on a diet that you might notice that you're having things like more low blood sugar levels. This is because your body now is going to be in that deficit scenario and is looking for energy, and because you might have burned through a lot more carbohydrates or glycogen, your body is now going to use fat. So your body's going to start using more fat for energy. This is why if you're starting to go into a low, it's a sign that you're starting to burn body fat. So that's a signal to just keep going, because your body now doesn't need as much insulin because it's burning through all of that, a lot of fat. Your body is able to use that for fuel. And so now you're becoming more sensitive because your body can absorb the insulin a little bit better because it doesn't have to bypass a lot of these other free fatty acids that are flowing through your system. So this is why you might start noticing your body starting to dip with the same amount of insulin. So it's going to be important to shift that insulin. Also, what you're going to notice is you're not going to have as many carbohydrate stores or glucose stores from the carbohydrates that your body eats. And so when you're on a diet, because you don't have more carbohydrates being stored as glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose, which came from carbohydrates, and that gets stored around your liver, which when you're working out, your body can release that to help keep blood sugar more balanced. And you can store more of that carbohydrate and glycogen in your muscles, which can be used as energy to help to preserve your body's blood sugar level a little bit longer. Now, if you have less of that carbohydrate now because you're eating in a deficit, you're more likely to nosedive into more of a blood sugar low as well as a result. So now we're put in a position when this happens that it's time for us to shift our ratios. So if you're on an insulin pump where it requires a basal segment, then you can start to find out and identify, where am I going low? Let's say you have a basal segment between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. Then you're going to want to put yourself in a position, and let's say you go low around 5 p.m. Then you might have to shift that to 2 to 3 hours earlier, since insulin kind of compounds itself. So if you had a low at 5, it's not because of the basal necessarily at 5 to 10. It's because of the basal that led up to that. So 2 to 3 hours before, just shift your basal down 0.2 to 0.5 units, depending on what you need, and then go from there and keep making that tweak until you find a sweet spot. The same thing applies if you notice that now you're going low within 5 hours after having a meal after a workout. This is a chance you're more sensitive to your insulin to carb ratio. Time to shift that down. Since rapid acting is going to stay in your system for up to 5 hours, you can make that shift again if you notice that your blood sugar level is starting to dip within 5 hours after a meal. Start to change that and pull that back as well. If you're somebody that's on injections, over time, if you notice that you are becoming more sensitive to insulin, as a result, you're just continually going low throughout the day, now's your time to shift that basal rate back as well on your injections or on your pump. And it's important to continue to shift your basal back if you are a type 1 diabetic that wants to burn body fat, because a lower basal is also more associated with having more weight loss and more fat burning. And so there's studies that are showing us an ideal basal to bolus ratio is more 37% basal and the remainder coming from a bolus. Now, over time, as you burn body fat, you will likely naturally be taking less basal overall, which again is important for the bigger picture. So we see the association, but understanding that your goal should be to continually dial that basal back, because when you do, you're going to have less lows. If you have less lows, you're less likely to blow your calories that you're in for a deficit. Also, again, what we're seeing is you're taking in what your body needs. So there's less of that insulin that's on board saying, hey, store body fat, because that's what insulin is there to do, is say store nutrients and store extra calories as body fat. And so by balancing that and lowering that, you're going to leave yourself less susceptible to your body storing that extra body fat it doesn't need. If we just go back to the basics of this, guys, like your body, again, will, when it comes to muscle and fat, as a type 1 diabetic, we have higher lipolysis, so the continual breakdown of fats, which then get into your body's blood, which can interfere with insulin and how it reacts to your body. You also have fat gain, so increased fat gain because of a lot of times peripheral insulin resistance in muscle and fat tissue. So we need more and more insulin, which when you have more insulin on board, it's telling you to store fat, not burn it. So that becomes an issue. And then you also have an unlimited capacity to store fat, whereas with muscle, there's a limited capacity, right, to store glucose. So if you have excess glucose, then the body, because you have these unlimited fat stores, will be more likely to convert some of that glucose into body fat. This is called de novo lipogenesis. So your body is more likely to, which usually happens in the liver, but it can still happen in fat cells as well, converting glucose into body fat. And all factors to keep into account if you are dieting and you are looking to manage your blood sugars better as a type 1 diabetic. All right, I hope that helped you guys out. If you guys have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. Definitely make sure I take care of them. And hey, if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you guys subscribe. Hit that like button down below. Anyone that you feel like could benefit from a video like this, make sure you guys hit that share button as well. I'll see you guys in the next episode.